All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Stepback NBA podcast. I'm Kyle Coleman. That's Pat Sabolka. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in again. We have a really cool episode today. We did a Zoom interview with former senior NBA writer for the New York Times and Bleacher Report. Now he's with Sports Illustrated, co-host of the crossover NBA show with Chris Mannix, legendary Howard Beck. It was really cool. We talked to him about some of his favorite interviews and memories from the Kobe and Shaq teams and all sorts of fun stuff, and some of his predictions from this year's playoffs and what he thinks is going to happen. So make sure you guys follow along on social media, Stepback Pod on Twitter, Stepback Podcast on Instagram. Otherwise, cool. Let's just run it. Let's get to the interview. Just a little bit about us, in case you're wondering. So I'm Kyle Coleman. That's Pat Sabolka. We run obviously an NBA podcast here. This was actually our college radio show. He was play-by-play, I was color for our college that we went to, which is a small school just outside of Chicago. It's actually where Max Strus went before he transferred over to DePaul. It's Lewis University. So, and then afterwards, because we have sports broadcasting degrees, but it was kind of questionable if we wanted to work for someone or try to build something on our own. So, we took our radio show and just sort of turned it into this, and now we do it on the internet. So that's a little bit about us. Now, I know you went to UC Davis, right?
Yeah. So that's by Sacramento. That's a couple hours from the Bay Area, which is where I grew up.
Yeah, totally. And then you've held a bunch of different positions with a bunch of different companies. What's your current job title right now?
So currently it's senior writer for Sports Illustrated. You can also throw in co-host of the Crossover podcast, along with Chris Mannix.
Great show.
Yeah, I do some occasional, co-hosting on SiriusXM NBA radio. So that those are the current highlights. So
nice.
Where in the Chicago area are you guys now?
So right now we're sitting in our studio, which is up on the north side. We're kind of right by Wrigley.
Okay.
We went to school in the suburbs, about 25, 30 miles south. But yeah, right now we're located up by Wrigley Field on the north side. So,
gotcha.
But I got to ask you, so what was the roadmap that took you from UC Davis to kind of where you are now?
So the roadmap, the roadmap is giving it too much credit. That suggests that somebody sat down and drew some lines and some curves and used colors and other things to make something that looked like it made sense, which does not track with my career. So no roadmap. I went to UC Davis thinking I wanted to be a sports writer. Lo and behold, that actually happened. But it's not that linear. So, I worked at the college newspaper. I covered sports. I did that for a couple of years. And then I got interested in just being a journalist, period, not just a sports writer. And so then I started writing news for the college paper, and I did that for a couple of years. And I was editor-in-chief of the college paper. And when I graduated, the first job I got was at the local paper, the Davis Enterprise, same town where UC Davis is, where I did sports for a while. And then I moved over to news again. And then I did that for 5 years total in Davis and Ventura County down in Southern California. So I spent a good 4 or 5 years where I was not even in sports at all, and thought I was done with it. And then one day in 1995, get a call from an old boss of mine, Mike Anastasi, who had been the sports editor at the Davis paper, who's now the sports editor at the LA Daily News, says, "Hey, I don't know if you are interested in going back into sports at all." And he's, this is I'm in Ventura, he's in LA, so I'm pretty close by. So it's an easy one to potentially pursue. And he says, we just lost our Laker beat writer, a guy named Mark Stein, who you guys may have heard of.
Oh yeah, of course.
So Mark Stein in 1995 left the LA Daily News for the Dallas Morning News, which is a bigger and more prestigious paper at that time, to go cover the Mavericks. And so they had an opening. And Mike and I had worked together, years before at this point. We'd stayed in touch. And he said, I think you'd be great at this. And that's, I was actually on the fence, if you can believe that. This is 1997 at this point. So I should say, so what did I say with 95? 95 was when I got to Ventura. This is 1997. So this is after I've been in Ventura for 2 years. So 1997, Mark Stein leaves for Dallas. I get this phone call. At that time, I'd been out of sports for a while, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. And then a couple of friends of mine said, wait a minute, someone's asking you if you want to cover the Lakers? Didn't they just get Shaq a year ago? Didn't they just draft this kid Kobe, who people think is going to be pretty good? What are you thinking? Why are you're questioning this? Why? Because I'm a rational person, I actually did say, okay, sure, let's see where this goes. But I was a little on the fence. I thought I was done with sports at that point. And so I went down, interviewed with, he didn't want to take over the process or shepherd the whole thing because we knew each other. So he said, I'm going to turn this over to the deputy sports editor and the assistant sports editor, or the editor-in-chief of the paper, and all those folks. I'm just bringing you through the door. And it went well. And I got the job, and, the rest, as they say, is history. I covered the Lakers for 7 years. Took that, jumped to the New York Times in 2004, covered the Knicks for a bunch of years, and then eventually that leads to Bleacher Report and now Sports Illustrated. So, I guess, as I say, no roadmap, just kind of a jumbled assortment of decisions and, junctures that, required decisions at various points.
So Howard, I gotta ask. Obviously working for the Lakers and covering Shaq and Kobe is just, it's one of the best jobs in the league, But obviously with the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant, I gotta ask, do you have any favorite Kobe stories?
Any memories or moments that really stick out?
There are a lot. It was 7 years on the beat, and so. And some ups and downs too, by the way, because you're covering guys day in, day out, and especially given the tensions between Shaq and Kobe throughout that as well. There were a lot of fun times watching that team, covering that team, and then a lot of very tense times and times when I ran afoul of Shaq or Kobe at any given moment, and so it's interesting when you're there every day, every practice, every shoot around, every game for the most part. In terms of Kobe memories, I never have any go-to memory on this. There's a couple stories I like to tell from his first year and I've written about this and I wrote about it after he died, because I think people have a general impression of Kobe as, especially for certain points of his career, as very hardened and very off-putting at times, or just distant. And the guy that I first met in 1997, when he's 19 years old, was still a kid and acted like a kid in a lot of ways, and was still just very open. A lot of things that had happened that would happen in his life later that kind of made him a little bit more distrusting or jaded or cautious with media or with anybody outside his inner circle. Those things came later. And so at 19, he's just a kid who loves basketball. And did he come to the NBA already with that swagger and that confidence and belief that he was going to be an all-time great? Yeah, but it didn't project the same way as what you see, especially in the mid-2000s, where he's got that really hard edge and he becomes the Mamba and he's jutting his chin out all the time. It's a different Kobe in 1997. So there's two quick stories from that period in the first 2 years that I covered him. And I can't remember if it was first year or second year, but one was one of his high school coaches visited, and they're practicing at that time. The Lakers didn't even have a practice facility. They were practicing at LA Southwest College. It's this little junior college in a not so great part of town. So we go out there to go cover practice, and so which is really strange, right? If you think about it, Shaq and Kobe, Robert Horry, Derek Fisher, all these guys are in a gym, a junior college gym in central LA, and people are kind of just coming going in that building. There was no privacy. It's incredible to think now, this would never happen now. So his high school coach comes to visit. Practice breaks up. Coach is hanging out, and Kobe, being very open back then, would just make the introduction. So hey, Howard, this is, and I can't remember. I don't think it was Greg Downer. I think it was an assistant coach. Says this is whoever. He's the one who taught me not to pass.
That's great.
Which I loved, because even back then, of course, Kobe came in with already, he established the rep pretty quickly that this kid's going to be a bit of a gunner. He's ultimate self-belief, has some bad habits he's got to break. That he had like the ability to be that kind of self-deprecating said a lot about him, I thought. And during that same period of time, his sisters had come to visit at one point. They came to watch practice. He introduced me to them. He was just really open and engaging. He was just a normal guy. All the celebrity and all of the having to build up of a defense mechanism and some distance, all that stuff hadn't happened yet because he had just arrived. And
right.
So,
well, I mean, we saw his whole life basically play out publicly. He was drafted at 17. He needs his parents' signature to validate the contract. This is, like you said, a literal kid, like a kid. That's really cool, man. Now, I'm not going to let you squeak by this. You said you ran afoul of Shaq and Kobe a couple times. I absolutely need you to elaborate. What happened here?
So when you cover a team every day, you're there for all their highs and all their lows. So if Shaq missed critical free throws, which happened a fair amount, as you might be aware.
Oh, yeah.
If Kobe jacked up a few too many ill-advised shots, as Shaq would call them, and we have to ask him about that would happen. And so you're there, if you're doing your job right, you should piss these guys off at times. Like, the job is not to just throw up softballs and placate them and try to befriend them or whatever. Like, the job is to cover the team and cover it critically, cover their day-to-day with a critical eye. You're there to serve the readers. You're there to serve the fans. And if the fans see a play broken off and it cost them the game, that's what you're supposed to ask about. So, yes, there were times when the questions then were not that welcome. And I never minded being the one to ask those. But the ones that stand out, bottom line this. I've been cursed out multiple times by both of them for completely different things. But the one, trying to decide which story to tell with Kobe. There are a couple that I have not told that I probably won't. But I'll tell this one with Kobe. So Kobe, he got in 2 fights in his career on the court, or 2 during the time that I was covering him. I don't think there were any others. There was one with Chris Childs. That was his first one. And there was one with Reggie Miller.
Oh, yeah.
The one with Reggie Miller, the game is over. I've actually grabbed my laptop and I'm going to head back to the locker room because we're on deadline. I got to rush back, whatever. So I think I'd already turned away because the final buzzer hit. And then you hear there's some kind of ruckus going on. You look up and there's Kobe and Reggie Miller going over the scorer's table, or up against it. Reggie had said something and Kobe ended up taking a swing. And so they both ended up with 2-game suspensions. The next time we get to interview Kobe about what's happened, day or 2 later, practice at El Segundo, their practice facility in El Segundo, big scrum around Kobe, typical thing. And I'm pressing him during that scrum with all these people saying, I made some reference to him instigating the fight because he threw the first punch. And he kind of bristled at that. And so then when it all broke up, when the press scrum broke up and everybody kind of walked away, Kobe kind of summoned me over to walk with me over to this other part of the gym where there wouldn't be as many people. And he says, what's this shit about me, instigating? I said, and he might have said some of this in the press scrum before we got to this. Then there was another thing on the side, but he basically, his message to me was, how many games did Reggie get? Oh, 2. How many games did I get? 2. So what do you think that means to what do you think the NBA decided then? I'm like, all right, fair enough. So clearly his point was that Reggie had said something that was so over the top or provocative that it caused Kobe to throw the punch. But he was not happy with my line of questioning. That one, it was tense for a day or so, and it settled. There were a few others. That I probably will just keep to myself for the time being. Shaq was always getting mad because he didn't think we were covering the things that were really happening. Shaq used to like to say, "Write what you see, brother." And that usually meant two things. He was either referring to the referees not calling all the fouls that should have been called with guys beating the crap out of him, which he had a point about.
Yeah, of course.
Definitely.
Or it was about us not writing about the fact that Kobe or some other offending party wasn't passing him the ball when he was clearly open or being single covered down low where he could just dominate people. And so if we weren't writing the way that Shaq saw it, that would annoy him. There was the year that after he won MVP, his numbers are down some. He's not blocking as many shots. He's not quite as active, not quite as dominant in all categories. Scoring wise, yes. Rebounding and block shots, I think, were down in the year after his MVP. And I think that was the year, or maybe it was the next year, but I think that was one of those years where it was like Jason Kidd and Tim Duncan were getting all the press about MVP, all the discussion mid-season. And it might have been like a couple years later when Kidd had gotten traded. And so Shaq's like, you guys already gave it away. You gave it away. And this is like pre-Twitter, pre-blogs, pre-most of internet, pre-most of the 24/7 talk shows. But there was still even a discussion back then. People start writing at a certain point about like where the MVP race is. Not as obsessively as we do it now. We're off. We're crazy now. We do it like 5 minutes after tip off on opening night now. But Shaq's like, you guys already gave it away. And so we got into this debate. I remember this was a visiting locker room in Utah. And I'm arguing with him. It wasn't just me. It was a few of us, the beat writers. And it was like, well, your blocks are down, your rebounds are down, your field goal percentage is down. Like, yeah, you're still dominant, but like by your own standards. And so I was like telling him, like, look, we're holding you to a higher standard, which is you of your MVP season. Like, that's the bar now. And so it was just this back and forth. And there'd be moments like that. And then but the difference between Shaq and Kobe is like with Kobe, it took a while to thaw. With Shaq's such a people person. And he'd get into a funk now and then, and he would go silent on us for like a week if he was really pissy about something. But for the most part, Shaq is such a people person, he can't help himself. He couldn't stay mad. He loved the back and forth. He loves people too much. Kobe being at that time a little bit more of a loner, I think it was easier for him if there was something really bothering him, he could just kind of cut folks off. But Shaq is exactly what you see on TV. He's just, big lovable goofball. And I'm sure he has some grudges, but I think he has a hard time carrying grudges. And I will say this just to put a period on this whole part of it. It's interesting when you cover a team up close for 7 years and you go through all this stuff. And by the end, players can get sick of you. You can get sick of them, frankly. I leave. But now every time I see them after I'm gone, after I've moved to New York, suddenly now it's like we're long lost friends or whatever. And it's a really funny thing. Because you're not the one in their face every single day anymore. But also because look, I'm not part of the team. I'm outside of, independent of, but I lived through all these same things that these guys lived through. And so there's this weird thing now where if I see Robert Horry or Rick Fox or Derek Fisher, any of these guys, there's a strange kind of connection I think we all have. They lived through it. They did it. They played the games. They went through the heartbreak and the glory and all that. I just wrote about it. I just asked the questions, sometimes annoyingly so. But I experienced it with them. And so we're all part of that era together now. And it's an interesting thing that you don't realize in the moment, but that years later, you like, it's kind of cool to know that, oh yeah. I remember this the same way you do. Like certain games, certain moments, and to compare notes, because guys are also more honest years after the fact than they would be when it was happening.
Yeah, of course.
Totally.
Well, yeah, it's like a shared experience. Obviously, you weren't in the games, but I imagine they see you and they know that you remember all the same things that they do. It's like a shared familial experience. That's really cool, man. Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit here. That's the Lakers stories from your Lakers days are pretty awesome. I know you covered the Knicks for a little while for the New York Times. After having seen all their down years and all that, what is it like? I know you said you're in Brooklyn now, but what is it like to see that basketball is, kind of back in the Garden?
Yeah, it'd be easier to appreciate and even as a reporter enjoy on some level if this were a normal season. I have been to one basketball game, one NBA game in person in the last 14 months or whatever. We were in June, March, April, May, June, 15 months. I've been to one game in person in 15 months, and that was Nets opening night against the Warriors in December because I wanted to see Kevin Durant opening his Nets career in an empty building because I thought that would be just a surreal image, and I wanted to be there to cover that. So I did. But other than that, I haven't been to any games because we still don't have direct access. Everything is still over Zoom, pregame and postgame. You can go to games as media. You can sit in your usual media seats, but our entire routine is still off limits. Our old routine of talking to guys pregame, postgame, in person, milling about on the court, shooting the shit with GMs and scouts and agents and everything. So there's no real incentive to go to games right now for me, especially because I don't cover games. I don't write game stories these days. I do features and columns and other things. The contact is more important than the game itself. the being able to see people and talk. So I've not been. So that's the caveat. But the Knicks, it's, I got there. I got to New York in 2004, covered the Knicks for 8 seasons, switched over to the Nets when they moved to Brooklyn briefly, then moved back to the Knicks. So I covered the Knicks for almost 9 years, 8+. And there were very few moments of positivity there, of good basketball or just positive vibes. There was the beginning of the Amari Stoudemire era when they first acquired him in free agency in 2010. Him and Ray Felton. Gallinari's a young player on the rise. Wilson Chandler. That team, the first 3 months, it was exciting. The Garden was electric, and it was the first time in my 6 years at that time here that it was actually fun to cover basketball at the Garden. Unless it was like Kobe coming in and dropping 60 or LeBron coming in and dropping 50 or something.
Definitely. Yeah.
But the Knicks were miserable. The Knicks were not, and they were miserable to cover anyway. They just, the organization always made things as unenjoyable as possible. But the first few months of Amari, then they get Carmelo. That trade took all the young guys away from the Knicks. And so kind of the spark that made that team fun went out the door. So, but the Carmelo years, they had some good moments too. Then there was Linsanity, of course, which was by far one of the most memorable periods of time, with not just of covering the Knicks, but during my NBA career, my NBA writing career, those couple of weeks, 3+ weeks, was just incredible. And then there was the 54-win season when the Knicks get to the second round. Roy Hibbert blocks Carmelo at the hoop, and they lose in 6. And that season I only covered parts of because I'd been on the Nets as well. So those were the highlights. And then they go into obviously there's this long drought until this season. But it's not watching it is cool because I got a ton of friends who are Knicks fans. I've lived here for 17 years now. I have a lot of friends who are Knicks fans. I have friends who work for the Knicks. And so I'm happy for all them. And they're a lot more fun to watch, clearly. And, even though I cover the whole league now, because I'm in New York, I'm going to turn on the Knicks more often than probably most other teams at their level. Whether it's a losing season, a winning season, whatever, I'm probably going to watch more Knicks and Nets than other teams just because it's in the ether. It's in the,
Yeah.
But they were fun to watch this year. There were times I would look up and think, has Alec Burks missed a shot all season? I felt like Alec Burks and Reggie Bullock never missed a shot when I was watching the game.
That's right.
And Julius Randle's hitting these shots that I'm thinking, when did Julius Randle, morph into Kevin Durant? Because the kinds of shots he was making.
Totally.
And so, it was a lot of fun, but it's not the same as if I were still covering the Knicks or on a day-to-day basis, or if I were there at the Garden to see the place come back alive. Although you got to say, even in their bad years, Knicks fans are incredible. They're dedicated.
That's right.
They are passionate. Yep. They believe and there's this underlying cynicism there as well, where it's always we know they're just going to disappoint us in the end, but in the moment we're going to believe with everything we got. But in the back of our minds, we know they're going to find a way to screw this up. There's this fatalism.
Yep.
I wrote about this back in January or February. I had a story about just Knicks fans and kind of that unique makeup of their mindset. But it would have been more fun if this had been in a normal non-pandemic year, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
Totally. And even that Hawk series is like,
Yeah.
we have the Trae Young chance. I mean, it was
unbelievable.
wild. So, yeah, unbelievable. It's like, it was good to just see New York back into it, you know?
Yeah,
It's
Spike Lee talking shit.
Yeah,
it's
awesome,
fun.
Dude,
It's fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. And,
Yeah.
so I kind of want to transition a little bit because I know you were talking about the Nets a little bit. And it's kind of this whole thing with the NBA nowadays where it's all about acquiring superstars and making your city and your franchise more valuable to other players around the league. And I feel like Brooklyn kind of did a really good job with that in the Kenny Atkinson year with D'Angelo Russell and Jared Allen and, you know, the bench mob they had and Jared Dudley and all those guys. So it's kind of like, I guess my question is to you, when did the culture change, do you think?
Is it the
for
Kenny
Brooklyn?
Atkinson D'Lo playoffs run? Is that what it is?
So, I mean, I think this is where you're leading with this question. But I'll just answer it this way, and then tell me if it's something else you wanted to dive into or dig deeper on. But like, I find myself as a reporter, and like, I don't have the emotional investment as a fan, right? Like, I don't care if they win or lose. So, if you're a Nets fan, you're probably more than thrilled that you now have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. You don't care whether it seems fair, or equitable. You don't care whether it doesn't feel organic, you know, as some people would call putting together these super teams. You just care that your team can win a championship, right? And that you get to watch incredible basketball from three of the most talented players we've ever seen every night. That's all you care about. But I've always analogized what the Nets just did to a little bit about that Carmelo trade for the Knicks, which was there was something, even though Amari was imported and Ray Felton was signed as a free agent, not that he was at the same level, but they had this core group of young guys that the Knicks had drafted or discovered and were developing. And there was something genuine about the bond, I thought, between Knicks fans and that version of that Knicks team for those first few months. They had an investment in them as fans. And when Carmelo came, okay, you've just raised the bar, right? Carmelo's one of the best players in the NBA. Now you got Carmelo and Amari. But you lost this connection with Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari and to an extent Raymond Felton and others who were in that deal. And suddenly the expectations are higher, but also the expectations of the players are higher. I always thought on the night that the Knicks clinched their playoff berth that season, I remember this vividly. So they had not been in the playoffs since 2004, I think. So now this is 2011. Long drought. And the night they clinched the playoffs berth, they just kind of walked off the court like it was no big deal. If that had still been Gallinari and Chandler and the young guys, they would have been hopping around all over the place. Like it would have been a different vibe. And there was something anticlimactic because it's like, well, we've got Carmelo Anthony. Of course you're going to make the playoffs. And so similarly with the Nets, there was something really fun about those couple of years after Kenny Atkinson and Sean Marks came in and they're trying to create something out of nothing. They got no picks. They got no talent. They're just a waste.
They're in a bad spot.
They're in a bad spot.
Worse than that. Like the ESPN at some point had declared them like the most hopeless team. I don't know if it was in NBA history, but they were the most hopeless team in the NBA because they had nothing to work with. And to their credit,
they got fleeced by Danny Ainge.
Yeah, and so to their credit, they did a great job of manufacturing something out of nothing. That's Sean Marks finding guys. That's Kenny Atkinson and his staff building those guys up. And so Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris, like guys who were just cast aside by their franchises, suddenly become these really good players here. And you know, they draft Jared Allen, they draft Karis LeVert. They're finding these great values lower in the first round, and those guys are becoming good players. And you know, they rehab D'Angelo Russell, you know, who was not considered all that great by the time they acquired him from LA. And so those teams were fun because the expectations were low. Some of these guys were fairly anonymous, and again, it's something very organic. And Nets fans are kind of, I think, bonding with that team. All those guys are gone now, except Joe Harris and Spencer Dinwiddie's contract, right? Like Spencer Dinwiddie's not going to play again, possibly for this team ever. So he's technically on the roster, but he hasn't played. So it's a completely different team. But like I had on my podcast a week or so ago, Benny Horowitz, he's the drummer for a band called the Gaslight Anthem. They're from New Jersey. Benny grew up a huge Nets fan. He's still a Nets fan, has season tickets to them in Brooklyn. And we talked about this whole thing. And he's like, man, I get to root for Kevin Durant and James Harden and Kyrie Irving. So like, yes, he has some sentimental attachment to those other guys. But for me, because the wins and losses don't matter to me, I still look at it as kind of like, it's too bad. The other team was kind of more fun
Right.
in a way. And I also do think, again, this is just from a global perspective on the NBA, it's not that super teams are bad for the NBA. Super teams have existed throughout history. We know that. I do think there is something concerning about the fact that the only time that these guys, when they do change teams and they join up together, it's going to be the two LA teams, the two New York teams. Eventually, the Knicks will get that, I'm sure, themselves, and maybe Miami, and maybe a couple of spots. But they're not. They're not.
I know.
So,
I know. I think that's what he was getting at, is what made the Nets a free agent location, and when is this going to happen? Is it 2 franchise cornerstones? How does that work?
This podcast is both audio and video, right?
Yes.
So for the listeners who are only listening and not seeing, you got to know that the Chicago jersey was getting popped just now, and I'm reacting to that.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
All right. So to your Chicago jersey, to your point, your team hasn't been able to sign anybody in free agency. It's been Carlos Boozer in that same.
Oh my God!
I'm sorry.
Don't remind us. Don't remind us.
Howard, come on, man.
I'm sorry. I mean, listen. I was covering my first year in the league was 97, 98. So the last year of the Jordan dynasty, and so I remember all those years that followed of they're going after Ron Mercer. They're going they want at one point they thought maybe we're getting Tracy McGrady, but there was always throwing money, saving cap room, trying to find somebody to come, and some combination of the way they broke up that dynasty and the bad taste left in people's mouths, the bad impression it left with agents and players, combined with maybe nobody wanting to actually take on the responsibility and the burden of coming in Jordan's shadow, in his wake. And so, but I also think all right, so Chicago, big market, great city. I'm not just pandering. I love Chicago, but the way that players evaluate these cities is not the same way that I would, right? I'm from the Bay Area. It is incredible to me that it took until they created this first organic championship team before Kevin Durant went there. The Bay Area is phenomenal. It's one of the greatest places on earth. Of course, I'm biased, but why wouldn't that
Silicon
have been a free agent
Valley, the
destination?
weather?
Why isn't Washington?
Totally.
Right. Why isn't Washington a destination? Colder, doesn't have the weather, but Washington, D.C., great city, big market. Not all big markets are created equal as far as players are concerned in terms of what's attractive to them. So the Bulls, great organization and certainly a rich history, but for whatever reason, weather, maybe still the ghost of Jordan. I don't know. It's been tough. So, what the Nets did though, I'll just say this, because the Nets and Clippers followed a parallel track here. They're the stepchilds in their own markets, right? The Clippers will never be able to carve out anywhere near the following that the Lakers have. They're that's an uphill battle, unwinnable battle. The Nets will never be able to capture New York. It'll take generations. But they both decided we're going to operate like small market teams. We're not going to just say, hey, we're a big market, come play here because you'll get all the benefits of it. No, they went and they built up something. They built a culture. They got certain kinds of players. They overachieved. They showed their shrewdness as front offices and everything. And then the stars came because they saw, okay, those guys are onto something, and they're in a big market. So you gotta show that you have a plan and a track record before you can just say, well, we're a big market, you should want to play here, right? And that's the thing with the Warriors, right? The Warriors had shitty ownership and were just adrift for decades. They didn't earn it. I could sit there as a San Jose kid and say, how come the team that I grew up on can't get guys? And it's not even that, because I don't root, but I certainly think the Bay Area is a great destination. That's a place that should have no problem attracting people for all the obvious reasons, market size, weather, everything. But they couldn't. Why? Because the Warriors, like the Knicks for a long time, the Warriors were kind of toxic. The Wizards for years weren't exactly a respected franchise. So,
and even after the We Believe era, it didn't pick up. It didn't pick up, like you said, until the first championship. And then it became, Silicon Valley's out there and the weather.
Yeah, and suddenly Andre Iguodala's like, I want to be a venture capitalist, so I need to go play in the Bay Area so I can go meet VC guys, right?
Yeah.
But, all that stuff existed before. It's just that the Warriors were a joke, right? Like that's the thing. Like, so the Bulls have had their own issues, right? And I think they're still trying to change their image, in NBA circles, right, with agents and other organizations of players. So, I think Chicago should be a destination franchise, and I think eventually we'll see that, but I don't know if they're quite to that point yet.
So, like, I'm just gonna ask this real quick because obviously they made a huge move at the deadline. They go out and get Nikola Vucevic, right, out of Orlando. I mean, he's super. I don't know. I feel like kind of those Orlando guys are kind of forgotten about all the time. But I mean, he had been probably a top 5, top 6 center in the NBA for like a pretty
years.
Yeah. For a long time. And I just think Zach LaVine has made a huge step forward this year. I mean, depending on who you ask, you could say Zach LaVine was most improved this year. But what I'm saying is, you have 2 guys now, and now you have these young guys. You have Kobe White and Lauri Markkanen. I feel like you could package a couple of those guys together, and then we're talking about, max level guy,
That's always the dream, right?
He shot
made it sound so good. I mean, it sounds so good.
Take 2 or 3 of my team's decent so-so guys, possibly on large contracts, and trade them for one all-star. That's the dream of every fan.
Oh, man.
Can we get $1 for 3 quarters?
Yeah, right.
So, but I like Zach LaVine had an incredible season. And, he became more efficient, more judicious, more effective, period. He was really good. And yeah, there are some bright spots there, but it's still, I think that roster, sometimes you look at a roster and you go like, okay, I like that guy, Yeah, that guy, got his faults, but I like his talent, whatever. And the Bulls are one of those teams where you go down the list and you think, I don't understand why this isn't working, but it's not.
Yeah, totally.
But it's not.
Totally.
And I liked the Vooch trading concept. Obviously, it became a disaster because now they're sending a lottery pick to Orlando.
Oh, man.
It's a really bad sign. I don't want to bring you guys down even further. It's a really bad sign when you make an all-in move at the deadline, thinking this is the time that we need to really show our progress. And it's a year for the first time in NBA history where you only have to finish 10th to make a play-in game to make the playoffs, and you couldn't even get to 10th. It's tough. That's deeply concerning. It's only 1 year in the new administration. I say give these guys time to figure it out. They're just getting the lay of the land and assessing these players, deciding who stays, who goes. Clearly, Wendell Carter's gone and Vooch is in, and a few other pieces went out to get him. So, if that's it, if you think your 2 pillars now are Zach LaVine and Vucevic, and you need to just fill in around them and figure out the best supporting cast between those 2, I could see the logic there, but they've obviously got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring up, I wanted to get your thoughts on, LeBron and the Lakers saga and their early exit, LeBron's first round exit of his career, and what the future of that whole thing looked like, because a couple months earlier, and most of the national media is either choosing them to come out of the West or choosing them to win it all, and a couple weeks later, a couple months later, and they're completely out of it, and it didn't look good. Obviously, Anthony Davis and the 3-point shooting, there was a lot that just, it didn't look good. There were a handful of games they were down by 30 within the first, quarter and a half. So I was just, I know a lot of the people that listen to this show are really interested in the LeBron narrative and the Lakers story. So what do you got for us on that? What are your thoughts on the Lakers and LeBron?
Yeah, you hitting the panic mode yet?
I think for the Lakers, there's 2 ways to look at this. There were a lot of disappointments there in terms of, Dennis Schroeder's performance, Montrezl Harrell, how little they got out of him, especially in the playoffs when it mattered most. Marc Gasol, all these moves they made in the offseason that we were all praising, that we were all saying the Lakers had a great offseason. They won the championship and they improved their supporting cast, which is really hard to do. And in the abstract, it looked like they had. And I think you could honestly say in some ways they did. They did improve the supporting cast in some areas. Or it was at least the right thought process. But I think focusing on the shortcomings of the supporting cast ignores the obvious, which is that LeBron was still dealing with the high ankle sprain, and Anthony Davis had the groin injury and had barely, he had just come back. They had both missed all that time. I was saying the whole time late in the season, when everybody was saying, well, the Lakers are still they got to be the favorites in the West, and I kept saying, okay, look, we can all do this thing where we say if healthy, they're the favorites. If Anthony Davis and LeBron James are healthy, of course, that's fine. But one, we don't know when they're coming back and if they'll be healthy or how healthy. And two, we don't know how much that team will have lost in the meantime in terms of their chemistry and their rhythm. These things matter. And I always say, like, if we talk year in, year out about things like rhythm, chemistry, teams peaking at the right time, the experience that guys have with each other, we can't just throw it all out the window and say, well, you got LeBron and Anthony Davis, it doesn't matter. Like, no, it matters, because they did replenish the supporting cast. And so they don't have a ton of minutes with Schroeder and Harrell and Gasol, and then Andre Drummond, who they get up midseason, and Ben McLemore, who they picked up at midseason. Like, Drummond was this, they're forcing this square peg into a round hole, in their starting lineup. They had to figure out how he and Anthony Davis play together. They had to figure out LeBron and Drummond. They had no time to do that because those guys had been out. Guess what? It mattered. Like, that stuff did matter, and their health in the end did matter. And so I don't think this is so much a failure of roster construction or panic button time or whatever. It's more the obvious. Their two most important players were hurt. And the drop-off, when you're built around two superstars in this league, the drop-off from those two guys to everybody else is always going to be steep. That's just the nature of it. And so it doesn't mean that it was wrong to go for Dennis Schroeder. It doesn't mean it was wrong to change out their entire center rotation. Although that's when I actually do think, man, would they have been better off just keeping Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee and never going?
Totally.
But I'll tell you, even if that's the case, they still probably would have lost the first round as long as LeBron and Anthony Davis aren't healthy. They did create a problem for themselves with that center rotation. It didn't work out the way they'd hoped. And Schroeder did end up, being less than impactful. But they couldn't have kept Rondo anyway because of money, because of cap issues. So, and Danny Green had gotten a little older, and, swapping him out for a younger playmaking guard, or a guy who can play make, who can do a lot with the ball in his hands, it made sense. In the end, it's not so much that the gambles they took on roster didn't pay off. It's that those guys ended up being less effective than you hoped, but combined with the fact that your two stars were just hurt. And the real concern now is, okay, can LeBron stay healthy through a full season at this age with all these miles on him? Because if he can, you're still in business. If he can't, then you can argue about roster construction, until you're blue in the face, and it's not going to matter.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think like the kind of the hyperbole and the histrionics have kind of followed LeBron's career, just being LeBron, but there's more of it now where it's, all the, what do they call themselves? Laker Nation is saying, was it worth it to give up all the young guys for Anthony Davis? It's like you won a title. You know that only 12 teams in NBA history have ever won a title.
Yeah,
so it's like, but the fact that this is a conversation being had, was it worth it to give up all the young guys for one title? It's like, it shows that a lot of Laker Nation is out there in panic mode right now.
Yeah, but it's like, I also think some of the contracts that we're looking at, they re-signed KCP, they re-signed Kuz.
All the clutch sports guys, the whole thing is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They have like 7 guys.
Yeah, no, I know. It's unbelievable. But I don't know. And, they offered Schroeder $84 million.
You turned it down, yeah.
They offered him an $84 million deal, which I'm sure they're looking at now as, a little bit better. But, I mean, I agree. It's like, as long as LeBron and AD are healthy, I mean, you got a shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do you have a...
I was just wondering what your opinion was on the Kristaps Porzingis situation and the Luka thing and what they should do, because obviously it didn't look good. It's kind of been a long time coming now. Ever since the trade, it's kind of been a long time coming. He hasn't looked like the same guy, but obviously after this last playoff series, now Kristaps is saying he feels more like a second option than a co-star, and they're paying him $27 million. So I was just wondering what you think that situation is going to play out like.
Yeah, no, they've got serious concerns there. I mean, the good news for them is Luka's only 3 years in. He's already one of the best players in the NBA. He's already MVP candidate. And they don't have to worry about him leaving anytime soon. It's not like this is not some kind of crisis where guys are in mid-career and coming up on the end of a veteran contract. Like Luka hasn't even hit his second contract yet. Nobody ever turns down their second contract, their first real contract. So there's no urgency there. Like there's not a panic like, oh my God, they're not going to lose Luka, right? But there is an urgency when you get a guy. I always say this, you have a responsibility as a team that when you have a special player, a generational type player, whether it's Steph Curry, and I say this about the Warriors all the time, I don't care about their young guys. I don't care about those draft picks. Trade every asset you have to be all in for the next few years because you don't know how many more years of elite play Steph Curry has left. Your responsibility to him and to your organization and to your fans is win as many as possible, deal with the future down the road. Who cares? And so that's, Luka's young, so the urgency is not as high, but he's already an MVP caliber player. So the responsibility is strike now. And they thought they were doing that by getting Porzingis, and it was totally justified at the time. Yes, he was coming off an ACL, but he was like a 22-year-old, I think 22 at that time of the trade, 22-year-old recent All-Star with this very unique size and skill set that was, the envy of the league. And they got him for nothing. They got him for three players who were, nominal rotation guys, and a couple of picks that are going to end up being late. Plus, they also got Tim Hardaway Jr. in the trade, and he ended up being so far arguably more valuable. So the trade itself is not an issue. The trade was easy. They gave up nothing and got two really good rotation players. The problem is one of those rotation players was supposed to be a second All-Star, and he might never be an All-Star again, and you're paying him a max salary. So the contract is the issue, not so much the trade. Was it a bad bet? At the moment, it looks that way, but he's still young in his career. And so the question becomes, because I think, look at this past season. His playoffs were a disaster, Porzingis. But the regular season, I ran this recently on Basketball Reference just to double check this.
He had a career year.
Well, not only that, but he averaged 28 and I think 1.3 blocks or whatever. There were like six guys in the league who averaged at least 28 and a block a game. And the others are like Giannis, Anthony Davis, Karl Anthony Towns. I can't remember the others, but it was like he's one of like 5 or 6 guys who did that in the regular season. So it was not some disastrous regular season. However, defensively, you look and he just doesn't move the same. He was always kind of gawky even when he first arrived, but there was a certain fluidity within the gawkiness or something, right? There was something there. And a couple knee injuries later, not seeing it. But let's remember, he had off-season knee surgery last off-season. I don't want to say last summer because it wasn't the summer of the off-season. But, before this season, he had knee surgery. He was probably still dealing with that over the course of the season. If he can stay healthy, and if it is just a matter of getting whether it's his conditioning back, getting a little stronger, whatever it may be, it's like too soon to just say, okay, well, that's it. This is just who this guy is. Like it's over. Like that's crazy. We've seen too many times in this league, guys, at 20 years old, 22, 24, and you write the book on them and you say, well, that's it.
How about Julius Randle right now? It's a bad habit we all have. We all do it. Fans, media, all of us. It's way too soon to just say, well, this is who Porzingis is. He's a bust. He's a disappointment. He's never going to fulfill the max contract. I mean, it doesn't look great right now, but we don't know. And if he hadn't had knee surgery, if there wasn't an obvious thing to point to say why was he a little less mobile and a little less effective this season? If there were no answer to that question, then you just say, wow, I guess he just got old real quick. But that's not the case. He had surgery. Guess what happens after surgery? People recover. They rehab. Yeah. I think, especially given his unique build, give it a little time. They may be okay. The more concerning part, perhaps, is this simmering notion that he's not happy with role, right? Whether he's earned it or not. Let's say he gets back to all-star level play as he showed in New York. At least then he's got somewhat of an argument to be more of a featured player in their offense. But if he can't do that, he's got he's got no case to make. So the Mavericks' hope has to be that there's another level still to get to there, that it's partially just health and conditioning, that you can
work your way through this, get a better version of him back next season, and that the rest of it falls into place, right? Because if he's more effective, they will feature him more. And maybe that just takes care of itself. But if it's more of an ego thing, if it's just like, this is just a guy who doesn't like being second fiddle to Luka, that's more, that would be more concerning for them. But I think it's way too soon to write off him or write off the Mavericks. They'll figure it out.
So you're saying you're still locked in on Kristaps in Dallas for another year?
I don't think there's a choice. I mean, how are you going to trade that contract? There's no such thing as an untradeable contract. We saw that when Wall and Westbrook got flipped for each other. We saw that when Chris Paul and Westbrook got flipped for each other. We've seen it with any number of bad contracts over the years. But there's no obvious one right now. And my guess is that they'll stick with what they've got in terms of Porzingis and Luka together for at least another season, in part because I don't know that it's that easy it won't be easy to trade him. You don't want to have to give up any assets to send him out. That would be a mistake. Or you're flipping him for somebody else's unwanted contract. I mean, I think some people have floated the idea of Kemba for Porzingis. Like, I'm not sure it makes sense necessarily on either side. I could see it somewhat. I could make the case for it, but my guess is both of those guys probably stay put.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that Carlisle won't figure out how to unlock a 7'3" sniper, weird unicorn guy. Like, man, I have to believe in Carlisle, Howard, I got one more thing for you, and then let's get you out of here. I know you're a busy guy. So with the playoffs kind of wrapping up here, it's looking like Phoenix, I mean, they're up 3-0. I mean, it's never over, but I think it's safe to assume that one is getting there. And then I don't know how you feel about the other series, but, Utah's up 2-0. Obviously, that one is less over, and then we have Brooklyn and the Nets thing going on. I was wondering if you wanted to throw out some maybe playoffs and then finals predictions for us here.
This postseason started with, I thought, plausibly 8 or 9 teams that could end up in the finals. And as we sit here now, the picture's a little clearer. I thought the Nuggets might be able to overcome not having Jamal Murray. That's not looking so great as they're down 3-0. I thought Utah might have a really tough time with the Clippers, given that Kawhi and Paul George are that's a really tough 1-2 punch to deal with. I wasn't sure if they had the defense at those positions to really contain them. And man, they've done a number on them so far. And now, they certainly look, but that said, the Clippers, we've already seen go down 0-2 in the first round and be down 3-2 and rally back. Kawhi Leonard can go supernova and change a series. So I still am not ruling out the Clippers. So there's 3 teams in the West that I think still have a plausible case. In the East, the Bucks were really fortunate not to be down 3-0. And I'm just blown away that the Nets could be this dominant without their third star. I mean, that's not selling short what Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are by any stretch. It's just that I thought the Bucks were better than this. I thought that's a series that should go 7. And especially if the Nets are down 1 star. And, I think that's partially about what the Nets are, but it's partially just, I think the Bucks are just somehow less than the sum of their parts right now. Or not up for the moment. Or maybe it's just the fact that Giannis still hasn't developed enough of a mid-range game and a 3-point shot and doesn't have, too many counters. Whereas Kevin Durant can kill you from everywhere at any time. So yeah. I thought the Bucks were the most likely team to knock off the Nets if anybody was going to derail them. So now it's down to probably the Sixers. And Embiid's got a slightly torn meniscus. He's playing really well despite it. But man, I don't know that I want my 7-footer running around on a slightly torn meniscus, knowing that at any moment maybe that thing tears a little more. So yeah, the Nets have a feeling of they have that sense of inevitability around them. And it feels foolish to pick against them at this point. I'd picked the Bucks to come out of the East, so I'm already wrong.
I'm with you, man. I picked Philly, so I'm wrong too. It's okay. What about the West? How do you feel about the West?
If it comes down to Utah and Phoenix, it's so funny too, right? On the one hand, it's like, well, of course, they were 1 and 2 in the West. Isn't it supposed to be that's the way it's supposed to be?
All year. Yeah.
Except that everybody, probably you guys included, we're all kind of sitting there waiting for like, yeah, it was a good regular season, but do we really believe that, Mitchell and Gobert or Chris Paul and Devin Booker are better than LeBron and AD or Kawhi and Paul George? Or like, it's just been hard. It's, the people will say, oh, lack of respect and all this. It's not even that. It's just that these teams have never been deep in the playoffs.
Proven it. Yeah,
exactly. They haven't been here in 10 years at all. So we're going to end up with what should be the most predictable thing in the world. The 1 and 2 seeds battling it out in the conference finals. And we're all going to go like, wow, look at that. Jazz Suns. So it's strange. I don't remember a year like this ever. Between those two, I think the Suns swept the regular season series, right?
I believe so, yeah.
I believe Suns fans have pointed that out to me a few times. Man, I don't know how to pick that one. First of all, regular season series don't mean shit in the playoffs. Sometimes,
right.
True,
sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. So it's like in the end they don't. So I don't take the 3-0 or 4-0 whatever it was as meaning anything or being a definitive indicator. Donovan Mitchell's playing out of his friggin' mind. Devin Booker has been great. They both have depth. They both have stout defenses. They've both got just
great coaching.
What's that?
Great coaching.
Monty Williams, I had at the top of my coach of the year ballot, and Quinn Snyder, I had third. Tibbs in the middle. I don't have a strong feeling on that. Like normally, there's you find one thing that you can go, this tips the balance. And sometimes what's tipping the balance is who's got the best player in the series. I mean, I think Devin Booker's got a slightly more refined game than Donovan Mitchell, but is he more effective? Is he more explosive? Is like any given night, it could be either of those guys or both of them going off. So this is not a series where you can point to that. Oh, let's go with the team that has the better player or the bigger star. They're kind of around the same level.
Yeah. Even the role guys, it wouldn't surprise me to wake up the day after and find out Jay Crowder hit 7 threes.
Yeah,
just
totally.
like it wouldn't surprise me to find out Joe Ingles or Bojan hit 7 threes. It's totally. Like they're very similarly constructed,
Yes. Yeah, great balance. Stars, but not super duper stars, right? Neither of them have the Anthony Davis, the LeBron James, the Kevin Durant, the Steph Curry, the Kawhi Leonard. They don't have that. But they've got two guys who might get to that level eventually, right? Devin Booker or Donovan Mitchell might hit that at some point in their careers. They're that next tier of stars. And so they're different. They're just built different than recent champions we've seen. So no, I do not have a prediction for you here. I'm just going to keep waffling for the next few weeks.
Howard, final question for you. I promise you we'll get you out of here. Just a little fun question we ask everyone on this show. It's the impossible NBA basketball question. Who's your greatest player of all time?
Oh, God. So I love and hate the GOAT discussion because
I understand.
I say all the time,
understand.
The basketball as a game, especially at the NBA level, has evolved so dramatically over the years, even in the 24 years I've been covering it, to say nothing of the decades that preceded that. Try to compare teams or players across the generations, across the eras is just inherently fraught. It's so much has changed. The style of the game, the emphasis of especially now the 3-point shooting, the pace of the game, the way defenses are constructed, training, nutrition, everything, nothing. So it's so hard to do. I love the discussion. So it's a love-hate thing. I love it because I think it's fun. Like I love hearing people get into it, even though it gets old after a while. It is interesting because it tells you how people value championships versus longevity versus stats versus whatever. offense, defense, everything. So it's always an interesting discussion. I'm not one who would just sit up in my ivory tower and dismiss it and say this is dumb or is ridiculous. No, I appreciate why people want to have it. I'm kind of in the camp of it doesn't matter. Okay. I'm kind of in the camp of if you think it's LeBron, great. If you think it's Jordan, great. I'm of the Jordan generation, right? Everybody who grew up around the time that I did, who came up on Jordan, is always going to be resistant to the idea that LeBron could leapfrog him. Younger folks most of your generation, those living outside of the greater Chicagoland area, are going to go LeBron. I assume you guys, even despite your generational bias toward LeBron or what should be a generational bias toward LeBron, you're still sticking with Jordan, I would assume?
I am not. I am not. We're LeBron James is the most complete basketball player of all time.
So there you go. Yeah. There you go.
A higher peak from Jordan.
Yeah.
For sure. That's not even in question. But in terms of a complete skill set, I'm actually of the belief that it's probably going to become Luka someday for like a small window until it becomes another guy because he's a walking 30, 10, and 12 or whatever. And you put that over 10 years. 10 years from now, people will be having that argument. And it's just a matter of if the stats extrapolate themselves. But, and I think it's going to be a funny little window until the next guy becomes the most complete. Because like you said, it's what do you value? Do you value this versus that versus this versus that. I think if you're talking about like the highest peak, it's Jordan, of course. I think if you're talking about like the most evolved version of a basketball player, it's probably like 2013, 2012 LeBron.
So it just shows though that I think of all the different influences on us as fans of the game or as media covering the game, all these things that factor into how we perceive players and teams and eras and all this. Generation and era matters almost more than anything, right? Here you guys are, where you're growing up in a city, in an area where Jordan reigns supreme, where everybody older than you is probably going to be lecturing you constantly about the greatness of Jordan, and you've probably seen endless loops of him doing his thing. But you're the LeBron generation. And so that's it. The generational influence is the most powerful part of this. And people who are older than me are still going to be saying, why are you guys always arguing LeBron versus Michael when it's clearly Kareem?
Totally. Yes. I was going to say, in my defense here, I'm going to be 30 here. So I'm a little bit half and half. My grandfather coached Team USA actually for many years. So friends with all those guys. Anybody listening wants to go look it up. His name is Glenn Sargent. Super interesting story. But anyways, I had the older guys just drilled into my head. I was forced to watch game film of Bill Russell and stuff like that as a little kid. And then so I was born in 91. But being the grandchild of a USA basketball coach, I was forced at like 5 years old to watch Michael and Scotty and to watch all this stuff. So I was actually at the United Center the last time Michael played there when he was with the Wizards, and he got like an hour and a half long standing ovation beforehand, and Patrick Ewing and all these guys were courtside, and it was really cool. So, I mean, Michael Jordan is one of my favorite basketball players of all time. I'm not one of these like ridiculous LeBron James people. I just think it's it's a fair argument, and I think, like you said, the generational thing is huge because like my grandfather wouldn't say that Michael or LeBron is the best ever. He'll go to, like you said, Kareem and Wilt, and he'll try to argue George Mikan and stuff like that. It's like you said, it's totally generational. And then, like you said, I think it's also what you put the emphasis on as well.
For sure. And that's the other thing too, is just like stylistically, Jordan came in, as a scorer. He was much more than just that, of course. He was an incredible defender, and obviously he could be an elite playmaker when he wanted to be. LeBron came in as this Jordan Magic hybrid where he's all about, he's controlling the whole game. And so he's going to, and he was always about emphasizing getting his teammates going and all that. But it didn't mean that he didn't want to score, and he ends up being one of the all-time greatest scorers. I've always said to LeBron, if you look at the greatest scorers, he's the best playmaker among the greatest scorers ever. And if you look at the greatest playmakers, he's the greatest scorer among the greatest playmakers. He's the only guy who's near the top of both, scoring and assists. And
he's the only guy top 10 in both. He's top 10 in both. He's the only guy top 10 in both. Yeah.
But it's also that if you just took, compare him to all the other greatest scorers of all time, he's by far the best playmaker within the greatest scorers. And if you took just the greatest playmakers of all time, he's by far the greatest scorer in that group, right?
The argument is like total points accounted for.
Yeah.
And it's like even all assists aren't even created equal, because if I generate assists for 3-point shooters all game, you know what I mean? So it's like
I actually had somebody run a rough estimate for this of this for me like 5 years ago, where I said figure out the total points accounted for, and they did some mathematical estimate to figure out how to factor in the threes or whatever, But yeah, but LeBron, he's built differently, literally built differently. His physical profile, the style of his game, and then that's all before you get into championships and longevity and all these other things. Okay, Jordan was 6-0 in the finals, but LeBron went to more finals. Even if LeBron gets to a 6th championship, there'll still be Jordan. People in the Jordan camp will say, yeah, but look at all those losses. And then you come back with but Jordan didn't get to as many finals. Maybe he should have gotten to more instead of retiring and playing baseball. So you could just go round and round and round. It's this is where I say it's kind of pointless. Again,
yes, it's pointless.
It's
totally,
fun. I appreciate it. I don't think there's an objective truth to this.
Of course not. Maybe someday we'll get to like the technology from the Rocky Balboa movie where he's old, but he gets to go back to his prime to fight so they're both like 27, or whatever. Maybe someday we'll get that. But as of right now, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Howard, we really appreciate you coming on. Like we said, we both have been fans of you and your work for a long time. So it was totally an honor to get to talk to you and get to shoot the shit with you about the hoops. So we really appreciate it, man. And have a good rest of your day. We'll let you go.
Yeah, thanks again, man.
Thank you, guys. This has been fun. Appreciate it. Great questions, and happy to do it, and appreciate the kind words.
Absolutely. And anybody listening, go check out Howard. It's Howard Beck on social media, right?
Yeah, just at Howard Beck.
Awesome. And then he's got an awesome show with Chris Mannix. That is the crossover,
yep,
right?
Crossover pod.
Sirius XM 186.
What was that?
Sirius XM 186.
Yeah,
NBA Radio. There you go.
Awesome. Howard, it was awesome meeting you, man. Have a good day.
Guys. Take care.
Thanks. You too.